First of all, I'd like to thank everyone for joining this session of the series. And also, if you join the other ones, thank you for doing that. I'm really excited about this presentation. For those who may not know me well personally, I've spent my career launching and managing operations for organizations, nonprofits, startups, and small businesses with the idea of creating efficient and effective operations that don't just get the job done, but drive results and do it in a way that minimizes administration, increases efficiency, and really allows organizations and businesses to grow with clarity and reach their target numbers. This is being recorded to be able to share this with those who are unable to attend. If you have any questions, please hold on to them to the very end. We will have some time for questions and answers. This is obviously a big topic. I've spent my career working on these stuff. I spend months working with clients on these matters. So this is going to be a good overview. I think there's going to be plenty of detail in here, some actual items to take, that sort of thing. But obviously, this is barely scratching the surface of what it really means to have operations in a process that you can trust. But we're going to use this as an intro and give you some actual steps to take with you on your journey in running your business or organization. So the real problem I see time and time again is that owners, leaders, founders think that they have succinct, clear operations, but it's really just chaos in disguise. And what it tends up always being is reactionary. Everything is ad hoc. It's there's no clear flow to things. People are working hard. I just got done working with a startup. I'm going to talk about some more later that people were busting their ass and working hard, including the founder who's working 20 hours a day. But the needle wasn't moving in a lot of reasons, in a lot of ways. And a lot of the issues that I uncovered for them was a lack of process. Again, process for them was all ad hoc. Everyone saw everything. Everyone responded to everything. And there was no defined process procedures. And they just kept reacting on repeat. And when that happens, they tended to do a lot of things manually, where if they just would have set up a process, a procedure, had the right people touching the right times, they would have been a lot better. I truly believe that most organizations and most leaders are not stuck because of effort, but because of chaos. And this is, not having the right operations and process in place is the reason why that often occurs. If you've heard any of my webinars or heard me speak or listened to my TEDx before, you know that I talk a lot about fear, comfort, and habits. It is to me, it is crucial to always point out that fear, comfort, and habits are the things that get in the way of our growth more than anything as individuals and as organizations. And the key thing to always remember is that these things are natural. Yes, they are 100% the enemy of innovation, growth, and change. However, they are absolutely natural elements. They've what allowed us as human beings to exist, to grow, to stay safe. Everything from, how do we learn to walk? It's a habit we don't think about anymore, right? We learn to stay safe by not putting our finger or hand on the stove. We look twice before we cross the road. We have to have times of comfort where we relax and not constantly on the go and change, right? So these are very, very natural things in human nature that have kept us safe, helped us evolve, helped us grow. But when it comes to innovation, growth, and change, they're the enemy because they're there to exist to keep us safe, not to progress. And so we have to create mechanisms in our lives, in our organizations to break that down. Because when we don't, the fear of failure results in clinging to control. Habit, just doing what we've always done without ever second guessing it, taking another look at it. And comfort, we tend to avoid change. Again, these are natural components, but we got to create the mechanisms around that. Here is why strategy fails without process. I've talked endlessly about why I think strategic planning often fails. And for me, it's always because it's the same people sitting around the same table talking about where we want to be in 5 years or 1 year, 3 years, 10 years, whatever it may be. But they don't ever do it without looking at the process. They don't ever look at it looking at the operations. They don't fail because of bad ideals. They fail because they don't account for where the organization is in reality right then and there. They don't look at whether or not there's clear roles, approvals, workflows, which all lead to stalled execution. McKinsey says 70% of all change efforts fail, and only 10% of strategies are fully implemented, according to the Harvard Business Review. And I'm a big believer. I know people talk about strategy all the time, but strategy without execution is just aspiration. So, again, I'm going to bring it back to one of the big reasons why leaders don't trust the process is fear. Fear holds us back so much. It's fear of the unknown. We haven't gone this direction before. We don't know what's going to happen. We're afraid of repeating past failures. I've been told before by leaders that we have one chance to get this right. It's also fear of letting go. We've built this, we created this. We're the leader, we're the boss. Things have to go through us, and it creates this false belief that if I'm not involved, it won't get done right or get done at all. We have to learn to let go of that control that is based in fear. Most leaders don't trust the system because the system was never built to be trustable. So, what happens when you have a process that you don't trust? It leads to slow decision making. Execution on those strategies slows or dies. Your team is disengaged, morale drops, you have high turnover. The leader becomes the bottleneck, which again limits action and activity. The leader becomes burned out, and you just keep doing the same things over and over again, even when you know they don't work. We all know that change is hard, but so is staying stuck where you are. And I've said this time and time again that I think people are making decisions not to change. And I think there's this belief or this view that I'm just not making a decision, but you are. You're making a decision to stay exactly where you are, even though you know it's not the right answer. And that's what I want to try to break people from. Some more stats for you here. 60% of small business owners are stuck in the weeds. And I think this applies to CEOs of nonprofits associations as well, right? We talk about small business, but most associations, nonprofits, you are still a business. You just don't have the tax implications. You run very, very similarly. 68% say micromanagement kills morale, again, which happens when we're not letting go of control. That is supposed to be 70% of projects fail due to poor execution, not 0%. I actually changed this on one slide, and the file crashed and didn't catch it on the next revision. So my apologies for that. What broken systems reveal about leadership? One of the places when I go in and work for an organization, if I talk to you for 15, 20 minutes about how you operate your accounting process and procedures, that's going to tell me so much about the leadership, control, and process in that organization. Look at things like I've worked for organizations where the CEO or founder or high-level executives are the only ones who are willing to send out invoices, as though sending out an invoice with one wrong word in it or a word that they don't want in it is going to make a client not pay you, right? Like accounting departments are working with accounting departments. They're not working with the executives in most cases, right? But this fear of someone at a junior level getting this invoice so wrong that it's going to mess up the relationship, and that's where control comes in. That's where fear comes in. That's that owner, that CEO working on a process that they have no business being a part of. Accounts payable is the other one. I was working with a startup. That's the one I mentioned earlier. I came in. They have a U.S. entity, a Greek entity, two sets of accountants, a set of bookkeeper who also operates as a CFO, three different platforms in which data was stored for accounting, four bank accounts. And here's what's crazy. No matter where an invoice came from, no matter who it was going to, what entity was paying for it, everyone saw everything. Both accountants, both bookkeepers, both books, everything. And they were having a serious problem of things being not paid at all or being duplicated payments. Again, because you have systems that weren't talking to one another. And it took weeks for me, multiple memos, meetings with the founder, et cetera, to get them to see that the problem that existed was they didn't have a process they could trust. So after a while, I get them like this. We have to simplify this process down. We have to define who gets what where, who sees what and where. We had to simplify this down, had to adopt a low cost accounts payable system that was going to make this easier so that our payments were actually tied to the bills we were paying instead of having going back and forth between systems that weren't properly recording everything for the both accountants and the founders and CEO. But here's the kicker. Even once I changed this and was communicating with this regularly to him, he still was worried. He still kept coming back to old decisions that had already been made. Well, what about this? What about this? How do we know that this is going to solve our problems? And I kept going back to him like the problem before was we had no process. Now we have a process. So we're going to work the process. We're going to trust the process. And the process is set up in a way that when there is an issue, we're going to catch it quicker, sooner, and resolve it faster than what we're doing right now. So the fear of past mistakes kept this leader stuck, as it does many, even after systems improve. So what we actually need in our organizations is operational excellence. This is a term that I started working with my book, The Curious Leader, and I define that as the ability of an organization to achieve its intended results as efficiently and effectively as possible. When you are able to create this environment where that occurs, you have structure, not chaos, trust, not control, cleared, aligned, repeatable operations. You keep the result in mind, and you're constantly working to improve. That's the goal by having a process that you can trust. So my very first job, coming out of law school, working for an organization I was a member of in law school, this organization's lifeblood was its chapter operations, both law students, pre-law, and alumni. Pretty much 80% of all revenue came from their chapter operations. Their programming, everything was done through these chapter levels. And my job was to go around the country and train these leaders on what they should be doing operationally in these chapters to achieve the mission of the organization, keep the revenue coming in through recruitment, et cetera. And I came back from this training, a 2-week training, and like something was just heavy on me. I'm like, I'm being told what to tell these leaders. But I couldn't find anywhere in resources, the website, anywhere where it said what they should be doing. So I went back with my curiosity, in hands, and went back to my boss, said, "Hey, I'm being told X, Y, and Z. Where is this located?" And he's like, "Oh, there's instructions in the back, an appendix of our district conference manual." So I was like, "Okay, if I don't go to district conference, will I see this? No. If I leave my book at district conference, will I ever see it again? No." Everything was no, no, no. So people had one shot once a year to get this valuable information that laid out exactly what the deadlines were, what the expectations were of each and every chapter. This is an organization that wasn't negligent. They had gone through some years of financial worry that they had built themselves out of. They had built a strong national office and pulled away some of the work volunteers were doing and had a very strong executive office at the national level that really moved the needle, got the organization out of bankruptcy, and was growing year over year. But even with all of that, they missed a small step. They missed a small step on bringing one of the most crucial elements of this organization to the forefront and communicating it properly. Once we did that, and I drove the way on this with my chapters, we had 5 years of increased revenue. We had record-breaking attendance at all events, and our programming soared 500% from our chapters. See, operational excellence isn't always about overhauls. It's about uncovering what's missing. It's the small fixes that can create big rewards. I think when most people think about change, innovation, growth, they think about big capital expenditures that are going to bankrupt the organization. We don't have the funds for all of these things. But it really comes down to a lot of times with the small details. Yes, that can lead to bigger things. There's no doubt about that. It all depends on, obviously, a little bit on what type of organization or business you are and how it's being run, what your products and services are. But by and large, it's these small changes. I wasn't planning to tell this story, but I will, because I've been seeing the article a lot lately. Bezos attributes the biggest piece of change for his organization. It wasn't the robots in the warehouse. It wasn't AWS. AWS. It was when he was still running a household business with 5 employees. The CEO, the CFO, everyone were packing books on the floor in his garage. And everyone's complaining. He's like, man, we really need to get some knee pads. And one of his staff members says, no, we need a packing table. See, he was focused on the wrong problem. He was focused on the end result, which was the knees hurting. And so he wanted to fix that symptom. But the real issue was they were on the ground, period. And raising it up, having tables, they could move quicker. They increased their productivity, I think, by like 60, 70% by this one little change in their operations. So where do you begin? The first part of an evaluation is taking a look at, do we have a process or not? If you don't have a process, the steps to create it. If you do have a process, then how do we evaluate that? And I want people to be very, very critical on their organization, on their operations when they're going through this evaluation, because I think a lot of times, again, leaders, operators, managers feel like they have a process because someone does a series of tasks. But it's often ad hoc. It's often reactionary. It is not a true process that the person doing it trusts, that the management trusts, that the leadership trusts. So be very, very critical on this piece on whether or not you feel like you actually have a process. So if no process exists, you build it from scratch. You define what that outcome is. What is it that we want to achieve? And you work backwards. You take a look at each and every step and action that takes from the beginning to the end to reach that intended goal. You look at the handoffs, the decision making. You assign clear ownership. You define success criteria. You design it with scalability in mind as well. And after all that is said and done, when you have a process that you can trust, you document that process. SOPs, whatever you want to call that. If it doesn't exist, you don't fix it. You build it right the first time. As someone who has worked with a number of startups in change management in organizations, the amount of time that is wasted in relaunching programs and platforms and in switching programs and platforms because they don't do it right the first time. They're not strategic in how they're putting it together and why they're doing it. They're not doing it with scalability in mind. And so maybe this platform, this software worked for this volume, but not that volume, which they wanted to hit in 6 months to a year. So you always got to have that end target in mind, and you're looking at every single step. You're documenting this, looking at all the different places in where this process occurs and where it could potentially break down. So when there is a process, what do? If you want a process you can trust, you have to analyze and map it. The goal is to get a full picture of exactly what's happening. Do this in a boardroom with whiteboards, smart boards, a shared doc, specific platforms and software that are designed for these type of things. And here is one of the key parts that a lot of people miss. When people are talking about process, strategy, analyzing, mapping things out, they often have the leaders and managers work on this project. And what that fails to do is to bring in the people who are actually implementing the work. I see time and time again, leaders going to realizing all of a sudden, hey, we just realized this part of what we do is broken. And they go to the person who does that day in, day out and says, hey, we just realized this isn't working. This is broken. This is whatever it may be. And the person says, I know, I've known for months. And the first reaction is to get mad at that person. But they really need to be looking at themselves as to why that person isn't able to speak up. And we're going to talk about the culture side of this a little bit more later. But when you're mapping out your process, here's what you want to take a look at and capture. Again, you're looking at every single step. You're looking at the handoffs, the role transitions. That's where things are really going to break down, where decisions are made, what tools and platforms are involved. You want to look at the time it takes for each and every step. Because the big thing with analyzing your operations, I kind of alluded to earlier, honesty is key. You need to drop the ego, drop aspiration. This is about analyzing exactly where we are so we can pinpoint the gaps and holes that we need to fill to move the organization forward. This is about visibility, not judgment. In my book, The Curious Leader, we talk about be curious, not judgmental. A quote from the great Taoist philosopher Ted Lasso, right? This is all about curiosity and learning about what we are doing at a granular level to find the gaps and holes. So what do we want to do when we're analyzing this process, right? We're looking at those steps and mapping it all out. We're drawing on a whiteboard, smartboard, whatever it may be. But again, the 5-step method to this, to mapping out this process, is after you have those things, obviously you're walking through from start to finish. You're identifying where work stalls and gets repeated. So when you have all those steps lined up on your whiteboard, take a different color marker, circle parts, right? Have a color for stalls, have a color for manual, have a color for all these things that we're going to be talking about, this gap analysis. But you're labeling all of these things. So you're looking for those stall points and repeated elements. You're looking at what's manual versus automated. You're highlighting handoff confusion and approval slowdowns. Are two people having to approve this? Are we approving a step too early to where they're kind of really there's 2 approvals over 3 steps, but really should be combined to one? Looking at every single thing, and you're going to prioritize your top changes. You don't have to try to fix everything, right, all at once, but do the little things that will move the needle and your top priorities. Figure out what those are, put those on the board. And that's really what's going to help move your organization forward. And this is truly about changing what's broken, but not over engineering. This is not change for change's sake, but it's change to fix the gaps and holes that are existing in your organization to help it move forward. So when it is broken, after you've analyzed everything, right, and we've pinpointed those things, and I realize this is a little bit redundant from each step, but I think it's important to really nail down what exactly we're looking for. So we're refining this process, where we're building a new process from tweaking what is there. You're removing duplication and decision bloat. You're removing those elements where the owner, the CEO, the manager becomes the roadblock. You're reducing unnecessary steps and reviews. You're fixing what slows down, but only where it matters. You align each step with the intended outcome. You automate processes where you can, even if that means adopting new tools and software at your exposure or finding new ones. And here's a key part. If you're going through this process of analyzing what you're doing, how you're doing it, and how that is affecting the flow, and you discover it is so messed up, don't be afraid to start scratch. Too many times people put a Band-Aid on a serious problem because they're too afraid to blow something up entirely and start fresh. And again, once you build out this new process or redesign that process, you're going to document that. Again, that's looking at your SOPs, all that sort of process in the way. So this first part, we've really been diving in about analyzing and looking at a process that you can trust. But now I want to talk about build it, trust it, now break it. You built the system, you trust it. But the key is not to fall back into those endless loops of habitual execution where nothing goes unchallenged. This is not a one-time fix. Innovation is challenging what has previously worked constantly, regularly. Yes, I shouldn't say constantly. Again, I don't want change for sake change, but you should be reviewing your SOPs minimum once a year, having the people who actually do that work pinpoints the gaps, the holes, the slowdowns that are existing in the organization and finding new ways to fix that. You're finding the cracks on purpose as opposed to figuring out the problems after the system breaks. The best time to break the system is before it breaks you. So, how? How do you do that? Agile operations. This is a term that kind of comes from the software world. When software developers and website developers starting to be able to use cloud storage to develop that allow them to work, in side parts of the platform that weren't visible, but they could make changes to the code and the look and feel of an application of a website without changing what existed. If you remember back in the earlier days of websites, right, when someone wanted to change a website, what happened? They took it down. They made the changes. They put it back up. With real-time development and agile development, they were able to make these changes real time. And that's what needs to be happening in your organization in every aspect. Your marketing operations, your internal operations, your sales, products, accounting, every piece of your business, your organization should be functioning from an agile operational component. It focuses on iteration, feedback, and adaptation, not rigidity. I want you to be thinking about fast cycles, real world testing, and just in time improvements. Again, these are terms that are common in the development world that should be brought more to the forefront in every aspect of business operations. Agile means building to adapt, not just to run. But here's the key. Agile only works if your culture allows it. My last segment was going deep on the culture side, and it was true that if you want to create agile operations, you need agile leadership. You need to define outcomes, not steps. And you probably have heard me say before, unless you're the lead singer of a one-person band, you have to bring the team along with you. And that's where culture comes into play. Teams must be empowered to test, fix, and evolve the process. Curiosity must be rewarded more than compliance. Think back to my earlier example of the CEO, the manager going to the lower level implementer of a process and said, "Hey, we realize this is broken." They said, "Yeah, I've known all along." Right? There wasn't a culture that allowed that person to speak up, speak out. They didn't feel comfortable in doing that. Again, I encourage you, if you weren't at the culture one, we'll be sending the videos out for all three webinars following this. Probably do it early next week. But learning about psychological safety and creating an environment that allows people to see something, say something, like you hear on the metro, in big events, that sort of thing. You got to allow for those feedback loops to happen naturally through a culture of trust and safety. If your culture punishes change, your systems will too. So I want to talk about before, again, if you have been on my culture workshop, this is a little bit redundant. You've heard this before, but there's not a better example for me. I worked for a fast-paced, innovative organization, nationwide organization, ended up going global for a little while. But they thought it was headed up by two very smart, ambitious men, individuals, and they thought they were building the best results-oriented, innovative organization. But what they end up doing was through a culture of fear, saying things like, "We have one chance to get this right. I don't want you just to think, I want you to think like me," through favoritism and several other components that really created a negative, toxic culture around fear. What it did was taught people, keep your heads down, avoid pointing out problems, and stay in your lane. That was the way you learned to keep your head off the chopping block, learn to not put yourself out there, not be noticed. That was the way to keep your job. So what happens when that occurs? No one points out when they see something's broken. No one brings a new idea for fear of being criticized for it not being what the founder or CEO or manager had thought should be the way to go. That resulted in serious turnover. I mean, for a small organization of, I think our height was 35, 40 people nationwide or globally, we were having 1 to 2 people leave a month. It was that much of a turnover, and we're just hiring and firing, hiring and firing, hiring and leaving. And it wasn't until I finally like went to one of the founders and said, "Hey, he's not going to be the last to leave." He goes, "Do we need to have a conversation?" I was like, "Yes, it's well overdue." So we had a very in-depth conversation about that, right? They, but the key here is to not create this culture of fear where you're beating people down, but instead replace a culture of compliance with a culture of curiosity. If speaking up gets punished, silence becomes the strategy. And I talked before about how the fear of leaders being unwilling or unable to make a decision is making the decision to stay the same. When you silence your staff, when you punish people speaking up, pointing out problems, bringing new ideas, you're doing the same thing through your staff. So the process works when everyone knows who does what, when, and why. Now, let me do a caveat here, real quick. When I say everyone, I don't mean everyone in the entire organization. If you have 100 people in your organization, or 200 people, or 50 people, not everyone should know exactly what every other person does. But when I talk about everyone, it's everyone who needs to know. People who touch that process, who are involved in that project, that procedure, whatever it may be, they know who does what, when, and why. The steps are visible, they're repeatable, they're documented. The leader step back because the system steps in. You've heard any of my webinars before. I always talk about looking at leadership as the conductor of an orchestra. They are not the expert in everything. They don't play every instrument. They're there to keep the rhythm and pacing moving the orchestra forward, not doing everyone's job for them and micromanaging it. They let each and every band member be their own expert in their own instrument, but they keep everyone on the same track. It allows the staff to take ownership and improve what's theirs. You adapt in real time when issues occur, not just once a year at reviews or whatever it may be. Decisions are faster, and the fires you have to put out are fewer. One of the big things that I've learned in writing the Curious Leader book, and the more I've done around leadership, operations, culture, is that you cannot separate them. They overlap. A great process runs without chaos, scales without confusion, and grows without you having to push. So what does that look like? Again, the process works when you have that overlapping element of leadership, culture, and operations. The leadership sets the vision. Let's go control. Trust the team. The culture is when you have feedback loops, empowerment, and shared ownership. Operations, you have clear workflows, documentation, and continuous improvement. The place where all three of those overlap is where scalable, sustainable growth occurs. A great process runs without chaos, scales without confusion, and grows without you having to push. I know that was on the last slide, but this is one of the most critical parts in really understanding how to move a team forward towards scalable, sustainable growth through processes you can trust. So here are some things. I want to challenge each and every one of you who are on this webinar to, not this week, it's Thursday, but next week, get going on something. Choose one chaotic area of your organization. Your billing and AP process, your onboarding of HR, your delivery of your product and service, your marketing, whatever it may be. I work with CEOs and founders all the time who constantly say to me, I know something's not right. I just don't know what it is. So if you have that feeling about any aspect of your organization, a department in your organization, a process in your organization, start there. Run a 60-minute mapping session with those doing the work, both the managers and the implementers of that process or procedure. You apply that gap analysis that we had before, you create a new process and launch it. And then I want you to do two things. I want you to go back, not to do two things, go back 2 weeks later and have a review meeting where you go through and see what's working. How much time is being saved? How much more clarity is it? Are we doing a better job in achieving the results? Those are the things time and time again that when people review their processes and create a new one that comes out of every single one of these mapping processes that I've ever been a part of. You fix one thing, you build one win. That's momentum. Again, change is not always about these big, massive investment, capital heavy improvements. It's about looking at what we're doing, how we're doing it, and why we're doing it that way, and make the real-time changes to create efficiency and effectiveness in what we're doing to achieve our goal or our mission. Are you ready for real clarity? Again, a lot of the organizations I work with, having that objective view of what the organization is currently doing is the critical step where they miss. It's why strategic planning fails. It's why strategies don't move forward. It's because they are not taking the time and the effort to do a full analysis of how that operation is running. Most leaders are either too deep in the weeds to see the real issues, or they're so high level they don't see what's broken. Surface fixes won't scale. Clarity only comes when you do a full diagnosis of where you are, what you're doing. We've created the growth navigation system. That is 4 different audits, assessments that we do in your organization. Looking at decision-making process, looking at your culture, looking at your strength and maturity of your operation in over 47 different areas. We're also taking a look at the efficiency of your internal operations and compliance, making sure that you're doing things the right way and staying on track. You walk away with a deep analysis of where things are, a 12-month roadmap to fix those areas, and we also stay with our clients to help them fix the problems going forward. We act as a coach and oftentimes more of an executive coach and consultant, because so much of what we have to do, first of all, is work with you, the leaders, help you see the right mindset to have to execute these changes, to create that operational excellence, to create that agile operations, to build a culture in your organization that's going to allow these changes to thrive and keep finding new problems to fix and bringing new solutions and ideas before things break down. Knowledge is powerful. Having the data of where you are is so crucial in this process. You can't fix the process until you know exactly what's broken. So here are some resources. If you're curious about my book, you can find it on Amazon, The Curious Leader. You can also text 33777 for a free PDF chapter, the first chapter. A key part of having the right leadership mentality to create these type of process procedures, to have the culture you need, is stepping into that curious leadership role. And I've developed a curious leader assessment. I've developed a curious culture assessment that analyzes your entire culture. I think that is a great place to start looking internally of where you are in your leadership, where the culture is, and making that first step right then and there. So I'm going to share the links as well after I stop sharing. But I encourage you to take a look at those and dive deep into who you are, what your leadership style is like, what your culture is, what that style is like, and start there to solve the problems. If you are looking to go deeper and you want to dive into your operational analysis, look at where you aren't trusting the process, where your operations aren't mature. I'm going to share the Calendly link for our growth navigation system that we'll do a quick walkthrough. We'll have a chat about what's working, what's not working, make sure that what we do is the right fit for you and your organization. But it really goes a long way to adding that clarity that organizations need to move forward. And let me also say this, that we're willing to do the hard work for our clients to show them exactly what we're going to uncover. A lot of audits and assessments, you're paying up large upfront fees, not knowing what the results are going to be. And that's part of our problem sometimes. Our trouble is like, we don't know exactly what we're going to fix for you. Every organization is slightly different. It could be strictly on the leadership side that needs some help, or the culture. Usually it's a mixture of everything, right? Maybe it's the accounting structure, maybe it's the marketing structure. So what we are willing to do is go deep with you before you're committing serious amounts of money, and work with you to find what's the gaps and holes that are existing and help you solve those. So I am putting the contact information and links in the chat. If anyone has any questions, raise your hand, do the Q&A thing, open up the chat, whatever it may be, and I'm happy to answer any questions you may have. Okay, if anyone is working on a question, if you want to, put a hand up, or put a one in the chat or something, so we know a question's coming. I don't want to, if people have questions coming in, I don't want to cut anyone off here. But if there are no questions, certainly want to let everyone go on their way here. So, but we still have decent number of people on the line here. So want to hold off if there are any questions. All right, I'll give it another minute or two here to see if anyone has any questions. It looks like people are slowly dropping off with no questions coming in, but I'll hold off here 1 or 2 more minutes. All right, seems like everyone's kind of slowly dropping off here, so I will go ahead and end the webinar. Thank you again for everyone who attended, stuck around the entire time. I know your time is valuable, and I appreciate it, you spending it with me this afternoon. And again, we will be sending out an email with all the recordings and additional information that we believe will be helpful in helping every leader and organization continue to move forward. So thank you again.